Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman Speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our September 9th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and today's episode features some crop marketing and risk management advice to apply in this challenging farm economy. And later in the episode, we'll hear from a former Iowa Hawkeye and NFL star who's using his platform to advocate for farmers as the newest member of the America Needs Farmers Wall of Honor at Kinnick Stadium. But let's start with crop marketing and risk management, topics that are certainly top of mind for farmers who are bringing in the harvest over the next several weeks. Iowa Farm Bureau's Farmer Education Program Manager, Zach Brummer, recently sat down with spokesman reporter Corey Munson to share his assessment of today's challenging crop markets and offer some tips for managing through those challenges.
Today I'm joined by Zach Brummer, Farmer Education Manager here at Iowa Farm Bureau. We want to spend a little bit of time talking about corn and soybean markets. So to start us off, can you briefly describe where we're at right now and what's caused these price slides we're seeing in the market?
Yeah, so, to do that, I think you got to back up and talk about old crop first. And so we kind of had this perfect storm develop at the end of last year after harvest, where we were coming out of a really large, actually record South American crop on both corn and soybeans. And that, in addition to some other things, created some significant headwinds for the U.S. markets this year. Producers kind of got caught in a position where they'd been in 4 years of drought and had been rewarded over the years for waiting to market grain, kind of waiting for those rally opportunities that came typically, around that planting season. Unfortunately, this year prices were still significantly depressed from where they had been the year prior, and producers just weren't satisfied with those levels and continued to wait for an additional rally that really never materialized. At the same time, we had these best in the past 4 years anyway type of growing conditions that have resulted in the August USDA WASDE release suggesting that we're looking at potential record yields on corn and soybeans coming up this fall. So that, combined with the old crop in storage, has producers scrambling to clear said storage because they're going to need it once we get into harvest here.
So it sounds like there's a lot of supply out there. And as we know, when you have plenty of supply and not as much demand,
right,
we're kind of set up for prices as they are. Are there trade or other domestic use issues you're seeing?
Soybean-wise, one of the big things is just the increase that we've really had in carryout. We were really tight coming into 2023 in terms of soy carryout, but that has significantly increased. And then again, as of the August WASDE, we actually saw a 125 million bushel increase to the projected carryout. That puts us at 560 million bushels and is a 29% increase from what the USDA was forecasting in July. So again, kind of that supply theme, especially from the U.S. this year, but again, referencing that record South American production last year, combined with some Chinese demand questions on soybeans. Last year, they kind of pivoted away from the U.S. pretty strongly in favor of cheaper South American bushels. At these price levels where we've actually seen some Chinese demand come back to the market here recently. And so it'll be interesting to see where that goes from here in terms of what that export demand looks like. But again, the U.S. balance sheet from a supply side is just very heavy right now. And both corn and soybeans, the August WASDE wasn't quite as bearish on the corn side, but we did end up increasing our production estimate to 15.147 billion bushels. That's off a little bit from last year's record, 15.342 billion, but still significant. And ending stocks there at 2.07, roughly, call it billion bushels. That's the highest since the 18-19 crop year. So that, combined with our good to excellent ratings on both corn and soybeans this year, corn's at a 4-year high at 65% good to excellent, And soybeans sitting here at 67% good to excellent at the beginning of September versus a 58% for this time frame last year. We've just got really good looking crops out in the fields right now that haven't experienced much stress during the growing season.
Well, you mentioned carryout, and I know prices being what they are, there's a lot of guys not selling this summer. So I'd imagine there's a decent amount of old crop still in the bins. Do you have any advice right now for guys who are holding on to that grain, and what are we looking at?
At this point, you have relatively few options. In my opinion, your producers are kind of backed into a corner as price takers at this point as we approach harvest. And they've realized that, and they've been aggressively selling grain here in August, especially following that WASDE report. That was kind of the last straw, you might say, when that was released and showed the numbers that it did. Markets responded negatively, naturally, and producers, acknowledged the fact that it was probably going to be rather difficult to find some significant support before harvest. Projected yields are going to demand space, and that space is going to be worth a premium. And as such, I think harvest basis levels are going to sting quite a bit this year. With that in mind, I think you can go out there in the market today and still see in certain delivery points across the state of Iowa, you've got premiums nearby for corn delivery, quick ship windows that are closing, but they are still there at last check. Same on soybeans. I mean, there's a pretty significant cash inverse in the soybean market still at delivery points as we head into harvest here. And so, my opinion is that you're going to need the space, and that grain's worth 5% in the market right now. And it's worth 6, 7, 8% if you were to sell that grain and use the cash to pay off an operating loan or something of the sort. So there's some opportunity cost there that you'd also be foregoing. So definitely my opinion would be to get that grain hauled to town. That's what folks are doing. They're getting those sales on, clearing that space for, again, is predicted to be record yields.
Now, when we look at the crop that's about to come in, are you suggesting farmers go ahead and sell some of that grain ahead of time? And do you like the spot market or the futures market for that?
For new crop, I'm not in the camp of putting sales on at these levels. I think we're hovering at or extremely close to the lows for the season here. And as we head into harvest, the cash prices, the basis pressure is not going to be attractive. So for new crop at this point, I'm more in the camp of store everything you can. I mean, we've got significant carries in both the corn and soybean market, the corn market especially. So that space is, again, going to be worth a premium. Your space should be full with harvest bushels, and you should be talking to your local grain buyer, or your preferred grain buyer, I should say, about strategies that'll allow you to capture that carry while still potentially participating in some upside futures movement as we enter kind of that more attractive window for sales come that March through June time period. But I wouldn't be very aggressive. In fact, I'd probably at this point be shying away from any cash sales in terms of getting ahead of new crop right now at these levels.
You mentioned watching out for those premiums. And I know Farm Bureau offers a tool that lets you look at prices around the state at different elevators and stuff. What's that called, and how's that work?
Yeah, we have a tool called the Cash Bid Search Tool. It is on our website, iowafarmbureau.com. It's one of the main banner icons you can select from there, so pretty easy to find. So what that tool really does is if you do find yourself in the spot market needing to haul grain, you can log on to iowafarmbureau.com, click that Cash Bid Search Tool. You can type in your zip code and then essentially set a search radius, and it'll show you a list of the current bids in that search radius. And so if somebody's sticking out, if somebody found themselves in a position that they need grain, corn or soybeans, you'll be able to recognize that quickly and say, okay, there might be a trade-off with freight that you need to consider, but you'll be able to see where the best bid in the market is for that day. Good tool just to check and use for those types of decisions.
Well, looking ahead, as soon as we get this crop out of the field, we're going to start talking about planting next year. What's on your mind? What are you thinking about going into planting season 2025? Do you see any cost savings that guys could be looking for, or ways they can really stretch that dollar?
Yeah, I think the end of the year here is going to be pretty interesting compared to years of recent memory, especially when you think about like tax implications. There's not going to be, in my opinion, quite a burden in terms of revenue, offsetting revenue from a tax perspective. So I think you're going to see a lot of folks holding equipment. You can read the John Deere headlines and already see that equipment sales are down, and ag manufacturing in general has had a significant pullback. But you're going to see folks, in my opinion, just be a little more cautious when it comes to capital expenditures. And I think their lenders are also going to be heavily involved in decisions as we move forward. You might see some marginal land go out of production. For instance, when prices are high, that 40 that's, been a hayfield for 15 years, it kind of becomes attractive, even though it's on the side of a hill. But when, you're dealing with corn with a 3 in front of it, you might reconsider those positions. So I think you'll see a little bit of that. My advice, I guess, at this point would be make sure that you're just getting lean. If there are or were areas that you can trim, I think you should be trimming those and just be really diligent in your decision making and do the math on the return on investment for pretty much every decision that requires a cash layout. And then also communicate with landlords. I think cash rents have been high, rightly, wrongly so. But as commodity prices went up, cash rents also went up because that demand for that ground went up with the prices. And so as they've come back down, we need to be actively communicating with those landlords and, don't be afraid to show them the math and have a conversation.
So I guess that begs the question then, with the annual debate, do you expect more corn or beans to go in next season?
Pretty early for that one right now, but the new crop 2025 soybean corn ratio is sitting at 2.39. That favors corn acres. Input prices, though, are going to be at the forefront of the discussion, again, with a focus on trimming costs and looking for those areas where we can round the edges, so to speak. I think this year's been humbling for many, and I see a likely return to disciplined marketing plans going forward, some of which may be driven by lenders, but regardless, establishing and following a pre- and post-harvest marketing plan is critical in any environment, but especially in this tight margin environment. And I think producers, again, have been humbled, and I truly hope and think that we'll see kind of a return to some of that more disciplined decision-making as we move forward.
You mentioned talking with your landlord, but also never hurts to talk to your banker, talk to your crop insurance salesman, and all that good stuff. So when it comes to new or young farmers, and those who are just brand new at this, do you have any advice, whether they're kind of already locked into a rental agreement or have bought land and have a loan that they're trying to pay for right now? Any encouragement or any just sage advice that you picked up over the years for them?
Yeah, I've got a cousin or two that are kind of in that boat of being young farmers, a little bit younger than me, that are making it work. I actually talked with one of them just here a week or two ago about it. But, it's a tough situation out there right now. There's no doubt. It just goes back kind of the same advice I had earlier, but identify and cut the excess. If there are areas where you feel like maybe you've overextended yourself a little bit, get out of those situations and find areas where you can, again, get lean and stay disciplined. Kind of repetitious, but again, if you've got a landlord, make sure you're communicating with those folks, showing them the math, your input suppliers, your lenders. Just make sure that you have a almost intimate relationship with those folks in terms of the amount of communication you have with them. This isn't the fun part of the cycle, you might say, but for folks that bought land that are paying off those loans, you should have a fair amount of equity in your farmland at this point. So there are highlights and bright spots kind of in every situation. And so don't forget to remember those as you're navigating this cycle. Lastly, I just say make sure that you're spending the extra and appropriate amount of time considering your crop insurance coverage levels as we move forward, making sure that you're protected from that side as well. Again, a lot of that's going to be in a conversation that you have alongside a lender in many situations.
Well, and weather doesn't seem to be getting more normal as we go forward. Between droughts and floods and everything else, I swear, we've got something coming at us every season now.
Yeah, it does seem that way a little bit. I think I read it in this past week, a Spokesman, that we're returning to a La Nina most likely here coming up, which is what we were in for those past 4 years of drought before switching to El Nino this past year, which resulted in the precipitation that we got and these crop conditions that we're dealing with now. So that's going to provide some additional volatility, you might say, as we move forward. So again, it's a cycle. We just have to kind of hang in there.
So beyond the elevator price tool you mentioned earlier, are there resources that Iowa Farm Bureau offers through their website that can help folks managing through tough times like this?
Yeah, we actually have a webinar scheduled out there on the website, Successful Self-Care in a Challenging Ag Economy. That's going to be on Monday, September 23rd at 1 p.m. We've got Dr. David Brown. He's the Behavioral Health State Specialist at Iowa State University, and I actually spent time with him last February. He worked with me on 4 in-person meetings we did across the state. I've heard him present before, and he does a really good job, so I'd encourage you to register and view that. If you're unable, that will be recorded and posted to the website following, so you will be able to go view that recording and the resources at any time. It's designed to be obviously a webinar for in-person, but then to be a long-term resource out there on iowafarmbureau.com. So check in on that.
And if members want to follow up with you or find out how to get a hold of these resources, what's the best way to contact you?
My email is zbrummer, that's Z as in zebra, B as in boy, R-U, M as in Mary, M as in Mary, E-R, at ifbf.org.
Any final thoughts on our way out?
Just as I think about the challenges that we're coming up against here, one saying that I've heard throughout my career comes to mind, and that's that grease is cheaper than steel. Keep your head on straight. Diligent maintenance on equipment is going to be extremely important to help you avoid any extra costs where possible. And it's going to be tough for a bit, but farmers are resourceful folks, and there's plenty of resources available out there. And Iowa Farm Bureau is excited to help us navigate through these challenges.
Thanks, Zach. During difficult times like these, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's outside of a farmer's control, which makes it so important for each of us to be able to identify and manage the things we can control. Zach offered some good tips and tools there, including the cash bid search tool for Farm Bureau members, and that tool is linked down in the notes for this podcast episode. We've also linked to the registration information for that upcoming webinar that Zach mentioned on managing farm stress, and we've included a link to additional farm stress resources as well, including a free service that offers expert one-on-one counseling for farm families. And as Zach mentioned, we've got more resources for farmers on the way, so stay tuned to this podcast and keep an eye on iowafarmbureau.com. When times are tough, it's important for all of us to rally together. It's also important for others outside of agriculture to understand the obstacles farmers face and why those things should matter to all of us, whether we farm or not. That's actually how the America Needs Farmers cause got started at the University of Iowa back in the mid-1980s when Hawkeye coach Hayden Fry put an ANF sticker on his players' helmets to draw attention to the 80s farm crisis. And while things are certainly much different today than they were in the 1980s, it remains important for the public to know that America still needs farmers today. That's why Iowa Farm Bureau has partnered with the Iowa Hawkeyes to elevate the prominence of ANF over the past 13 years. With an annual ANF Game Day at Kinnick Stadium, the ANF Plaza, a permanent fixture in the northwest corner of the stadium that pays tribute to America's farmers, educational contests that help consumers understand why America needs farmers, and a lot more. The ANF partnership also features an annual award for a former Iowa Hawkeye football star who exhibits the traits of Iowa's farm families, like hard work and perseverance. That annual ANF Wall of Honor recipient is also an advocate for farmers, and this year's recipient is Brandon Myers, a former Hawkeye star who went on to enjoy a successful 8-year NFL career. We had a chance to interview Brandon leading up to the announcement that he's being added to the ANF Wall of Honor, and as you'll hear, for Brandon, the journey to NFL stardom started on a central Iowa farm.
My background in agriculture and farming is from a very young age. Growing up here in Prairie City, just living on a farm. My grandparents had a farm. They had about 400 to 500 acres, and we did corn and soybeans, and they had mainly pigs, so we always were around the animals and around the crops ever since I was a little kid.
And those early years made a quick impression, helping shape the work ethic that would later benefit Brandon on the football field.
It's been instilled in me. It's work ethic, it's grit, it's waking up every day and going out and doing it even if you don't feel good or the weather's not the best. So that's just kind of how it touches me in everyday life.
Of course, coming from a farm background, Brandon understands the importance of farming in our lives, and he sees ANF as an important message to carry forward nearly 40 years after it started.
I think in everyday life, you forget about the importance of the farmers and what they do and what they provide. I think it's a big deal. It's not the most glamorous, but it's kind of the foundation of who we are as people, and it's super important.
That's a message Brandon is passionate about sharing with his own kids as well.
We live in Arizona, but when we get a chance to come back here like we are now, I want my kids to go out and be outside and go ride the four-wheeler, go be on the farm, go get dirty. It kind of shows you the Iowa way, where you're outside, you're working with your hands. There's no better way. And even though we don't live here now, in everything we do, I just try to show my boys that this is where our food comes from. We want to eat healthy. This is how we do it. This is where the process starts with the farmers. It's just about me trying to give knowledge to them, and then just showing them, being around good people, being around people in small town Iowa. There's a lot of benefits to that. So we try to soak up as much time as we can here, and to kind of surround yourself with those good types of people, those good farmer quality type people.
Naturally, as a fan of the ANF cause and the players who have been added to the ANF Wall of Honor before him, Brandon is excited to join us for the 2024 ANF Game Day on October 12th.
My parents and my family, they're just extremely excited and thrilled. It's definitely a big deal. We're definitely looking forward to it. And just to be a part of an organization like this is very special. The ANF brand and logo touches a lot of people. Seeing those guys who have gotten the award ahead of me, those are the guys that you look up to and you follow. And for me to be on the wall with them now is a very cool experience. So it means a lot to us, for sure.
Congratulations, Brandon. And thanks for stepping up to advocate for farmers as an ambassador of the ANF cause. In agriculture, we all know how important it is to tell our story, so we're grateful to Brandon and our other past ANF Wall of Honor inductees for using their platforms and voices to share why America needs farmers. And we also have some tremendous advocates for the values that Iowa farmers stand for at Iowa State University. I'm talking about the Farm Strong Squad at ISU. Late last month, we unveiled the 2024-2025 Farm Strong Squad with the Iowa State Cyclones, featuring 16 coach-selected student-athletes who demonstrate the values that define Iowa's farm families, like a solid work ethic, commitment, and integrity. You can learn more about the members of this year's ISU Farm Strong Squad and our 2024 ANF Wall of Honor recipient, Brandon Myers, down in the notes for this episode. Agriculture needs more storytellers and advocates, and we're proud to work alongside the Iowa State Cyclones and Iowa Hawkeyes to surface those ambassadors who can help elevate ag's story for important consumer audiences. That's all for this edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you picked up something helpful and that you'll join us for our next episode on September 23rd. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.